Welcome to Mind Trap Stories. I'm your host, Roger, and today we're steeping ourselves in the world of Miss Marple. Chapter 1: A Morning at St. Mary Mead. Have you ever walked into a garden so perfect it almost whispers secrets? Can the soft scent of roses hide mysteries waiting to unfold? That Tuesday morning, the crisp air of early autumn clung stubbornly to St. Mary Mead, teasing the last traces of summer warmth. Miss Jane Marple knelt among the white roses, her fingers deftly snipping away the sped petals, humming softly to herself as a golden sun spilled over her garden, making every dewdrop sparkle like tiny stars. Oh, how she loved these roses, the pride of her long years of tending, the way their scent could lift the heart and calm the mind, though the sting of a hidden thorn made her gasp sharply, and a small shiver of pain ran through her back. A little laugh escaped her lips as she pressed a hand to her lower spine, thinking of the years behind her and the patience that gardening demanded. Just then, the gentle squeak of the garden gate announced Mrs. Florence Green, breathless and wide-eyed, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Morning, miss," she panted, as if the words themselves had run across the village to reach her. "I've just come from the post office. Oh, such news, Miss Marple, you won't believe it." Miss Marple smiled, a soft, amused twinkle in her eyes, for Mrs. Green was a creature of habit, organized yet endlessly entertained by village gossip, and the thrill of delivering it always lit her up like a child showing a new toy. "Pray, what has the village buzzing this time, Florence?" she asked, voice gentle, teasing. Lowering her tone to a conspiratorial whisper, Mrs. Green leaned close, eyes darting as though the roses themselves might overhear. "It's about the fete on Saturday, Mississippi, Mrs. Hartley. Yes, she's entering her famous marmalade again. Can you imagine? She hasn't participated since her husband passed, and everyone's talking, everyone, Miss Marple." A faint smile touched Miss Marple's lips, amusement mingling with curiosity. "Ah, yes, her marmalade, the golden jars that glimmered like captured sunlight. 5 years running, first prize each time, with a flavor that was unmistakable yet held some elusive secret note that no one could ever identify." "That's just it, Florence," whispered Mrs. Green, leaning even closer, excitement quivering in her tone. "They say she guards that recipe like the crown jewels. And now, Frederick has returned from Africa, you know, her nephew, and there's talk of a gentleman from London asking after it." Miss Marple's brow lifted, a small gasp of intrigue escaping her. "Frederick back? How interesting. That restless boy, nearly 40 now, returning from mining ventures abroad, tanned, smartly dressed, carrying an air of adventure and perhaps a touch of bravado that everyone expected from someone who'd spent years in the distant colonies. And yet, human nature, she thought, smiling faintly to herself, was as constant as the rising sun. People always exaggerated, always dressed their triumphs in glimmering robes, no matter where they had wandered. "Perhaps we might take tea on the lawn," she suggested, gathering her basket, the warmth of companionship mingling with the faint perfume of roses. There, beneath the shade of the old apple tree, Mrs. Green spoke of the fete preparations with meticulous delight, of Dr. James Crawford, the new doctor with modern ideas yet a gentle smile, and his sister, Miss Margaret Crawford, reserved yet intriguing, a chemist from London, with a quiet intensity that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. And there, subtly woven into the chatter, came whispers of Mrs. Billings and her insistence on displaying historical culinary traditions, including Mrs. Hartley's famous marmalade, an insistence met with firm, polite refusal, the elderly woman's pride and caution radiating from her like the golden sun over the hedges. Later, Miss Marple strolled toward the village, library book in hand, her mind alive with subtle calculations. On the green, outside the post office, she spotted Mrs. Hartley standing tall and upright despite her 70-odd years, a gleaming jar of marmalade at her side, sunlight catching the amber gold like a promise of sweetness and secrets. Beside her, Frederick Hartley, tanned and angular, scanned the crowd, a smile polite yet distant, eyes sharp, catching every movement, every whispered glance, every flutter of gossip like a hawk circling its prey. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartley," Miss Marple called softly, heart lifted by genuine pleasure, for these encounters, though ordinary, carried the warmth of human connection. Yes, indeed, one must uphold village traditions, the elderly woman said, voice calm, firm, carrying both pride and the faintest hint of fatigue. Frederick's hand was warm in hers, but his eyes flickered with something unreadable, a shadow beneath the polite exterior, and Miss Marple caught it, a flicker of curiosity, tension, and the faintest thrill of anticipation, as if the village itself held its breath. Conversation drifted to the mundane and the meaningful, yet every word, every gesture hinted at undercurrents invisible to most. When Miss Crawford passed, she observed quietly, the chemist's eyes sharp, betraying more than her polite mask. And there, as Miss Marple continued her walk, library book tucked beneath her arm, every cobblestone, every flutter of the rose petals, every distant laugh of village children seemed to pulse with secrets, as if the entire St. Mary Mead held its breath, waiting, just waiting, for the first stirrings of a story that would unfold with sweetness, sorrow, suspense, and perhaps even danger. For in that jar of golden marmalade, and in the hearts of those who cherished it, lay mysteries that would soon tangle themselves into the very soul of the village, and Miss Marple, with her keen eyes and gentle humor, knew, deep in the marrow of her mind, that nothing, not even a humble village fete, was ever truly ordinary. Chapter 2. Chaos at the Fete. Have you ever wondered how a perfect morning can suddenly twist into chaos? Can the smallest distraction reveal the biggest secrets? Saturday dawned bright and clear over St. Mary Mead, the kind of morning that made Mrs. Mavis Price almost weep with relief, her nerves frayed from days of fretting about the village fete. Beneath the ancient oak on the vicarage lawn, Miss Marple sat, knitting needles clicking rhythmically as her thoughts wandered and wove through the patterns of life and human nature. Around her, the fete sparkled with typical English charm. White marquees dotted the gardens, bunting fluttered in the breeze, and the Women's Institute tea tent overflowed with cheerful chatter and the scent of fresh cakes. Yet amidst the laughter, the music, and the clinking of teacups, there was a tension that prickled Miss Marple's senses like a hidden thorn. Her sharp eyes noticed Mrs. Hartley, standing with her golden jar of marmalade, her back perfectly straight, her hand steady though her heart must have been racing. Everyone whispered about her recipe, the secret she guarded as if it were the last thread of sunlight in a world that demanded it. Ha ha ha, the villagers joked among themselves, yet beneath their smiles was a curious awe, for they knew, everyone knew, the legend of Mrs. Hartley's marmalade. The judge, Mrs. Bantry from Gossington Hall, moved methodically among the entries, her face serene, but even she could not hide the flicker of fascination as her gaze fell on the golden jar. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the tea tent. A child had overturned a jug of lemonade. Screeches of surprise and muffled laughter rose as cups toppled, sugar spilled, and people clutched their hats, cheeks flushed with excitement and embarrassment. In that brief instant, Miss Marple caught sight of something that made her stomach twist. Mrs. Hartley's recipe book, once carefully clasped to her chest, was gone. A faint gasp of horror escaped the elderly woman's lips. "My book!" she cried, eyes wide, searching frantically. Frederick Hartley sprang to her side, his face tight with concern, murmuring urgently, "Someone must have put it somewhere for safekeeping," yet his tone betrayed worry that went deeper than mere misplacement. Mrs. Price, flustered, tried to calm her, but the book was nowhere to be found. Tears threatened. A shiver of panic rippled through Mrs. Hartley as the reality sank in. All her recipes, collected over 50 years, a lifetime of precision, of secrets, of moments captured in sugar and citrus, vanished in a heartbeat. The murmurs grew, villagers exchanging sympathetic glances and curious whispers, while Miss Marple observed quietly, her heart both aching for the elderly woman and racing with the pulse of intrigue. "Ha ha!" someone exclaimed nervously, but Miss Marple's mind was already working, linking glances, gestures, half-spoken sentences into patterns that most would never notice. Frederick's concern seemed genuine, yet the slight tension around his eyes hinted at more than simple worry. Was it desperation or calculation? Even Dr. Crawford, cheerful and polite, could not disguise the faint frown in his brow as he surveyed the small, disturbed crowd, and his sister, Miss Crawford, hovered at the edge, eyes bright with subtle curiosity, a shadow of unease tightening her lips. The judging continued with an air of subdued formality, Mrs. Hartley's marmalade still winning first prize, its golden brilliance unchanged by human folly, yet the delight it should have brought was clouded, laughter tinged with a nervous edge. Frederick escorted his aunt home, his stride purposeful, yet he returned within the hour, moving among the tents with a quiet intensity, eyes scanning, noting every detail, his presence calm but charged, like a hawk circling unseen prey. Miss Marple noticed Mrs. Billings, bustling among her displays, ostensibly absorbed in her own task, yet her attention flickered toward the vanished book, a spark of interest betraying more than mere civic duty. And then, as the afternoon sun angled low across the vicarage garden, Miss Marple's gaze fell upon Miss Crawford, partially hidden by a rhododendron bush, deep in conversation with a tall, distinguished man unknown to the village. A hush seemed to settle over the scene, curiosity rippling through the gathered crowd as parcels exchanged hands, and the stranger walked briskly away, leaving questions hanging in the air like the scent of the roses that swayed gently in the breeze. Miss Marple, knitting needles now idle in her lap, sipped her tea with a faint smile, murmuring softly to herself, "Oh, how easily a village secret can stir trouble, and how often the smallest incident, the loss of a single book, can uncover layers of desire, ambition, and perhaps even danger." Little did anyone know that golden jar of marmalade, innocent as it seemed, had already begun weaving a web of intrigue, a story that would reach far beyond the polite conversations and cheerful laughter of the village fete, leading, in only a few short days, to something far darker, something that would bring sorrow, suspicion, and a mystery only Miss Marple could hope to untangle. Ah, the thought of it made her heart tingle with a familiar excitement, for the human mind, with all its foibles and secrets, never failed to fascinate her, and St. Mary Mead, with its gentle hills and serene gardens, was about to reveal its most unsettling tale yet. Chapter 3. A Body in the Pantry. Have you ever felt the quiet of a village morning shatter so completely that it leaves a shiver running through every heart? Tuesday arrived in St. Mary Mead with a gentle sun and a crisp breeze, a day that should have been calm and ordinary. Yet Miss Marple's gardening scissors paused mid-snip, her heart hitching as the sharp wail of an ambulance echoed down the narrow streets. "Oh no," she whispered to herself, and a chill ran down her spine, for such a sound in a village this small always heralded calamity. Mrs. Green came rushing up, breathless, cheeks flushed with urgency and fear, and Miss Marple could almost see her hands trembling as she spoke. "Oh, Miss Marple, such terrible news! It's Mrs. Hartley, found in her pantry, dead, only moments ago, by young Alice, the maid, who was weeping and clinging to her apron." Ah, Miss Marple's heart tightened. How sad, how unbearably sudden, for a woman so careful, so full of life, and yet now, gone. The thought of Mrs. Hartley, reaching for her jars, her beloved pantry in disarray, and collapsing, oh, it made her chest ache. Mrs. Green's voice lowered conspiratorially, as if sharing a secret with the universe itself. "Alice says she was surrounded by jars, toppled and scattered, as though she had been reaching for something high on the shelves, and then, oh, the poor dear, it was like she simply fell, without warning. Yet, Miss Marple frowned, murmuring thoughtfully, that made little sense. Mrs. Hartley never placed anything high. Her arthritis would never allow it. The mystery of the jars disturbed her, the chaos in the pantry echoing through her mind like a drumbeat of questions, unrelenting. And then Martha, oh Martha! That little tortoiseshell cat, inseparable from her mistress, nowhere to be seen. Miss Marple's heart gave a little jump. The absence of the cat felt heavier than any ordinary pet's disappearance. Could the creature's absence mean something more sinister? She had to know. Slowly, she walked toward the village, each step measured, every eye she met reflecting whispers of disbelief, sorrow, and a hushed excitement that she alone seemed to sense was more than it appeared. At Mrs. Hartley's quaint whitewashed cottage, the police had already arrived, their vehicles parked solemnly, and Inspector Slack emerged, harried, frowning, exuding authority and impatience at interruptions. Yet Miss Marple's calm smile did not falter. "Good morning, Inspector," she said softly, her voice carrying the sympathy she felt for the villagers, and yet a thread of curiosity. He grunted, barely hiding his irritation, but she persisted gently, expressing condolences, noting how sudden, how tragic it was. The inspector dismissed it all as natural causes, the heart, the age, and all official matters routine, but her mind whirred, spinning threads of thought. Frederick Hartley appeared then, pale yet composed, the shadow of grief across his face softened only slightly by duty and control. Miss Marple spoke kindly, murmuring sympathy, observing every detail. The half-written note found in the sitting room, the missing recipe book, the precise way the pantry jars were positioned and disrupted, and above all, the cat's curious disappearance. His eyes, tight with concern, flickered with a hint of calculation. Oh, the human heart, so capable of grief and secrecy intertwined. As she walked on, the village seemed to hold its breath, small groups murmuring, children hushed by the gravity of the news, and yet Miss Marple's mind was alive with questions, threads connecting the missing recipe, the disturbed pantry, Frederick's urgency, and Martha's absence. Each step brought a new clue, each glance a new hypothesis, and she felt the familiar thrill of the hunt, the subtle pulse of human nature revealing itself in desperation, sorrow, and the small obsessions that make a village both tender and dangerous. Ah, the thought of poor Mrs. Hartley, so devoted, so precise, her life captured in jars of marmalade, now suddenly snatched from her grasp, tugged at Miss Marple's chest. And yet, beneath the grief, beneath the weeping of the household and the hushed conversations of neighbors, a story was beginning to unfold, one of hidden motives, secret knowledge, and mysteries that would not rest until every truth had been uncovered. Miss Marple, knitting now in her mind the patterns of behavior and human folly, understood that the missing recipe book, the displaced jars, and the absent Martha were threads of a much larger tapestry. Oh, how often the ordinary becomes extraordinary when grief, fear, and human cunning converge, and oh, how she longed to untangle it, piece by piece, before the village could recover from the ripples this tragedy had set in motion. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the lanes, and she knew that this was only the beginning, the first tremor of a wave that would soon wash over St. Mary Mead, leaving sorrow, suspicion, and questions in its wake. Ha ha ha, people say life in a village is quiet, she murmured to herself, but I've never found it so. It pulses with hidden stories, and today, oh today, it had begun to reveal its darkest secrets. Chapter 4. The Wednesday Knitting Circle. Have you ever noticed how a quiet room can carry more secrets than the loudest streets? Wednesday afternoon found Miss Marple's sitting room alive with the familiar rhythm of knitting needles clicking, soft murmurs of conversation weaving through the air like the threads in their hands. The ladies of the knitting circle had gathered, But today the patterns of wool seemed secondary to the patterns of worry etched on each face. Oh, the shock of Mrs. Hartley's sudden death still hung thickly over the village. Even the air seemed to shiver with it. Miss Weatherby, knitting furiously, muttered her disbelief, though a tremor in her voice betrayed her concern, while Mrs. Price, perched primly on her stool, whispered about the impossibility of finding someone so meticulous gone in an instant. Miss Marple offered a quiet sigh and passed around her seed cake, and the women bit into it with the briefest distraction from their grief, murmuring sympathetic "Os" for the poor woman whose pantry had been turned upside down, jars scattered like shards of memory across the floor. And then, oh, the curiosity of Martha, the beloved tortoiseshell cat missing, as if she had vanished into thin air, made them all lean forward, their needles forgotten for a heartbeat. Could the little creature have sensed something before the end, or had someone taken her in the chaos? The thought made Miss Marple's chest ache with that peculiar blend of sorrow and suspicion that always followed tragedy in St. Mary Mead. Conversation turned, as it always did, to the practicalities of inheritance, the cottage, and the papers Frederick Hartley had so urgently sought, his agitation on the phone to unseen interlocutors rippling through every story Miss Marple had gathered. The missing recipe book, the frantic search, and Frederick's upcoming plans to rush to London whispered through the room like a dark undertone, unnoticed by anyone but the keen eyes of Miss Marple. And oh, how her heart stirred as she listened. Miss Crawford, with her industrial chemistry knowledge and the strange wartime tales of invisible ink made from marmalade, had been lurking in the background of every event, her eyes sharp, her questions delicate but pointed, her intentions cloaked in polite civility. The knitting circle women, unaware, chatted lightly about flower arrangements, Sunday sermons, and local engagements, but Miss Marple's mind wove everything together: the jars in the pantry, the half-written note, the absent cat, Frederick's restlessness, the missing recipe, and the subtle but unmistakable tension in Miss Crawford's posture. Ha ha ha, people might say it's just a recipe, just a cat, just a pantry, she thought, but every detail pulses with human desire, secrecy, and hidden purpose. The afternoon stretched and waned, laughter occasionally bubbling nervously from the ladies as they tried to fill the heavy air, yet beneath every smile lingered the tremor of dread and wonder. Oh, to understand the why and the how, Miss Marple mused, one had to look beyond appearances, to notice the tiny hesitations, the furtive glances, the whispered urgencies, all forming a tapestry of events that no ordinary observer could fully see. As the ladies rose to depart, Miss Weatherby's final words fell like a sudden gust of wind, mentioning Frederick's inquiries about London train times, hinting at business, urgency, and secrets that were not yet revealed, leaving Miss Marple with a heart quickened by anticipation and curiosity. Alone at last, she opened her small notebook and began to sort through the intricate web she had already begun to weave, connecting the missing recipe book, the disrupted pantry, the absent Martha, Frederick's anxious searches, and Miss Crawford's unusual knowledge into a single, pulsing pattern. Oh, how human nature revealed itself in such small villages, she whispered to herself, as she carefully plotted the threads of possibility in her mind. Tears of sorrow mingled with the thrill of discovery, laughter tinged with the sharp edge of fear, and Miss Marple knew that tomorrow would bring her closer to the truths hidden beneath grief, secrecy, and the seemingly trivial events that so often led to extraordinary consequences. The village seemed quiet, calm, and unsuspecting, yet she felt the storm gathering, ready to sweep over St. Mary Mead in ways no one could yet imagine, and oh how she longed to untangle it all, piece by intricate piece. Chapter 5. Secrets Behind Closed Doors. Have you ever wondered how a simple piece of paper could hold the power to unravel an entire life? That Thursday morning, the village of St. Mary Mead seemed unusually still, as if it, too, were holding its breath. Miss Marple, notebook in hand, wandered along the quiet lanes, her thoughts dancing between the missing marmalade recipe, the absent Martha, and Frederick Hartley's restless eyes from the day before. Every glance, every hushed conversation she had overheard, pulsed in her mind like a heartbeat she could not ignore. Ha ha ha! People go about their routines thinking the world is ordinary, but she knew better. Inside the Hartley cottage, whispers and shadows had settled like dust, curling around the walls where sunlight dared not linger. Frederick moved from room to room, his hands trembling slightly as he rifled through papers, muttering to himself, the tension in his voice sharp enough to make her heart ache. The worry and love for his late aunt were evident, yet there was something else, some silent urgency that made her pulse quicken. And the recipe book. She could almost see its golden gleam in Mrs. Hartley's hands, the pride and the secrecy, the invisible code that might hide more than fruit preserves. Miss Marple's eyes swept the cottage with gentle, precise scrutiny, noting how the jars in the pantry still seemed to whisper stories, some missing, some oddly displaced, each one a silent clue that teased the edges of understanding. Ha ha! Humans are so easily distracted by what seems trivial, yet she knew that even a misplaced jar or a half-written note could ignite chaos. A faint noise from upstairs made her pause. Was it the cat? Martha? Or perhaps another observer, careful and quiet, masking their intentions behind polite concern? Miss Marple's mind raced, stitching together conversations overheard at the library, the knitting circle, and the village green, seeing connections where others saw only coincidence. Tears prickled her eyes as she imagined Mrs. Hartley, so devoted to her craft and traditions, gone in an instant, leaving behind secrets as delicate as her carefully simmered marmalade. And yet, there was excitement too, a shiver of anticipation, the thrill of uncovering truths hidden in plain sight, the subtle dance of human nature exposing greed, fear, and longing. Frederick paused, his face pale, staring at the jumble of papers and books, and Miss Marple's heart clenched with understanding. He was desperate, yes, but also frightened, as if every mislaid item might carry consequences far beyond what anyone could imagine. And then there was Miss Crawford, moving elegantly in the shadows, her question seemingly innocent, her interest quietly probing, leaving Miss Marple to wonder what knowledge she already possessed, and how it might intersect with the Hartley's secret legacy. Ha ha ha! A recipe, a cat, a note, they all seemed so simple, yet every detail held the pulse of something larger, something that would soon ripple through the village with consequences none could anticipate. Miss Marple leaned against the doorway, letting the silence settle, feeling the tension vibrate in every corner, every whisper, every glance, and she knew that the threads of human desire, secrecy, and fear were tightly wound, ready to unravel at the smallest provocation. The village seemed innocent, cozy, and bright, but beneath it, like the hidden layers of marmalade, lurked the bitter taste of secrets, and how she longed to taste it all, understand it all, and weave it into the story only she could see unfolding. And as the morning wore on, each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of paper, each fleeting shadow reminded her that the mystery was far from simple, that every heart in St. Mary Mead beat with hidden purpose, and that soon, very soon, all would come to light in ways both heartbreaking and astonishing. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Shadows. Have you ever felt that a simple knock on the door could change everything? That Friday morning in St. Mary Mead began quietly, almost deceptively so, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the tension that lay beneath the surface of every cheerful smile. The village seemed to hum softly with the aftermath of Mrs. Hartley's sudden death, yet an invisible thread of unease wound through the cobbled streets, tugging at anyone who cared to notice. Frederick Hartley, pale and restless, had been seen moving with purpose from one cottage to another, every glance over his shoulder filled with urgency, every step betraying the weight of responsibility and fear. Ha ha ha! Villagers thought he was simply grieving, But Miss Marple knew grief often hides deeper puzzles, and in his case, it was tangled with a desperate search for a piece of paper, a fragment of memory, or a secret that had been jealously guarded for decades. The image of Martha, Mrs. Hartley's devoted tortoiseshell cat, darting in and out of alleyways, tugged at her heart. Why would such a creature vanish at a moment when its mistress had needed it most? And Miss Crawford, poised and elegant, yet oddly tense, floated through the village like a shadow, asking polite questions, lingering at the edges of conversations, as if her curiosity hid something far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together snippets of overheard words at the post office, the faint tremor in Frederick's voice, and the sudden disappearance of the marmalade recipe book. All trivial items in the eyes of ordinary people, yet to her, they were signals flashing in a language only the keenest observer could decode. Each movement, each glance, each carefully staged smile revealed layers of human desire, fear, and longing. She felt the pulse of secrets that stretched beyond the village's quaint facades. And then there was the pantry, the disturbed shelves, jars nudged aside, and the half-written note left behind. Oh, how they whispered the story of urgency, of a race against time that few could yet understand. Tears threatened her eyes as she imagined Mrs. Hartley, meticulous and proud, protecting her legacy to the very end, and how suddenly that world had been shattered, leaving only echoes of memory and fragments of truth scattered across the village. Miss Marple's heart fluttered with anticipation, the thrill of piecing together human nature's hidden intentions, knowing that every small clue, from the missing cat to the invisible ink suggestion by Miss Crawford, to Frederick's restless pacing, was a key to unlocking the true story. How fragile life seemed, how easily secrets could ignite a chain of events no one could contain, and yet how irresistible the pull of discovery was to someone like Miss Marple, whose eyes caught details others missed, and whose mind could weave them into a tapestry of hidden motives and unforeseen dangers. She lingered at the vicarage garden, listening, watching, letting the patterns of human behavior unfold before her, knowing that within hours, another ripple would appear, another twist would test the village's calm exterior, and that the story of Mrs. Hartley's marmalade and Frederick's urgent search was only just beginning. Oh, what a tangled web human hearts could spin when secrets and desires collided, and Miss Marple, with a quiet sigh, felt the weight and thrill of the mystery settle into her very bones, ready for the next revelation to burst forth like sunlight through a shadowed window. Chapter 7. Secrets Behind Closed Doors. Have you ever wondered what hidden stories linger in the walls of a familiar home? Secrets that sigh and tremble even when the room seemed calm? That Saturday evening in St. Mary Mead carried a restless hush, as if the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for truths to reveal themselves. Miss Marple, moving quietly along the narrow lane toward Mrs. Hartley's cottage, felt the weight of anticipation pressing on her chest, a strange mixture of dread and excitement. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across cobblestones, flickering with the promise of revelation, and she could almost hear whispers of the past entwined with the present. Frederick Hartley had returned once more from his anxious search, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning every detail, every corner as if the very air might betray the secrets he sought. How weary he looked, how grief and urgency had carved themselves into the lines of his face, yet determination shone even brighter. And the missing cat, Martha, whose absence tugged at the village's collective heart, seemed to carry its own silent message, darting just out of reach and leaving behind a trail of questions. Miss Crawford appeared again, as if drawn magnetically to the Hartley home, her elegant composure barely masking the intensity in her gaze, her every step measured, each word carefully chosen to elicit information without revealing her own intentions. It was fascinating, the delicate dance of human nature, how people mask their desires, fears, and ambitions behind polite smiles and cautious gestures. The pantry loomed large in Miss Marple's mind, the disrupted jars and half-finished note whispering urgent stories of secrets hurriedly hidden, a private war waged among simple household objects, and she could not help but imagine Mrs. Hartley, so meticulous and proud, struggling to protect her legacy in those final moments. Tears pricked her eyes as she considered the fragile balance between life and memory, how quickly a well-ordered world could shatter, leaving echoes of longing and desperation in its wake. Frederick's urgent pacing, the subtle exchanges of Miss Crawford with those who seemed unsuspecting, the quiet observations of villagers too polite to interfere. It all wove together into a complex tapestry, and Miss Marple felt her heart race with anticipation and empathy. How easily human hearts were driven to extremes, how secrets, once buried, could ignite curiosity, fear, and ambition with a single spark. She paused near the cottage, listening, watching, piecing together the patterns of desire, protection, and desperation, knowing that within the next hours, one more revelation would surface, one more puzzle piece would click into place, and the quiet village of St. Mary Mead would be drawn even deeper into the spiral of mystery surrounding the missing recipe, the lost cat, and the hidden truths of those who walked its streets with smiles that did not reach their eyes. The thrill of discovery, the pull of secrets, and the fragile humanity of it all surged through Miss Marple as she prepared herself for the truth to finally emerge from the shadows, and for the village to witness the consequences of curiosity, greed, and loyalty tangled together in ways no one could have imagined. Chapter 8. The Final Revelation. Have you ever felt the chill of knowing that everything you believed safe and familiar could unravel in an instant? That Sunday morning in St. Mary Mead carried a restless quiet, as if the very air was bracing for a confession long delayed. Miss Marple walked slowly through the village, her heart a mix of anticipation and dread, each step echoing with questions that had refused to let her rest. Why had the marmalade recipe caused such anxiety? What had Frederick truly been searching for? And why had the quiet, loyal Martha vanished when her mistress needed her most? The thought of poor Mrs. Hartley, so devoted to her jars, her orderly shelves, her beloved recipes, now gone forever, made her chest tighten with sorrow. Frederick's face appeared in her mind again, the lines of exhaustion and worry etched deep, yet beneath them, an intensity that could ignite both hope and fear. And Miss Crawford, so composed, so precise, had she truly been curious about chemistry, or did her mind dance with secrets far older and more dangerous than anyone suspected? Human hearts were endlessly fascinating, capable of love, fear, pride, and deception all at once, and the village had become a stage where every glance, every gesture, whispered untold stories. Miss Marple paused at the edge of the Hartley garden, eyes tracing the places where jars had shifted, shelves disturbed, and the half-written note lingered in memory like a soft, urgent voice calling for attention. It was not just a recipe, it was a map, a key, a legacy, something worth protecting, worth seeking, and in some hearts, worth killing for. The moment of revelation came quietly, almost imperceptibly, as she pieced together the puzzle. The urgency of Frederick, the subtle interventions of Miss Crawford, the curious questions of Mrs. Billings, and the village's whispered gossip all converged, exposing the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Tears welled in her eyes at the fragility of life, the weight of secrets, the twists of human nature that led ordinary people to extraordinary acts. And then, with a quiet sense of inevitability, the final pieces clicked into place, revealing not only the fate of the missing recipe, but the shadows behind two unexpected deaths, the tangled web of ambition, love, and loyalty, and the surprising ways courage and intuition could restore order to chaos. The village would never forget, and Miss Marple, with her gentle wisdom and unwavering patience, would stand silently, marveling at how much could hide behind a smile, a jar of marmalade, or a simple act of kindness. The mystery had ended, but the echoes of human nature, its beauty, its folly, its endless surprises, would linger in St. Mary Mead forever, and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the unraveling, curiosity and caution intertwined, leaving a story that would be whispered for generations.